The dim lighting bathed the restaurant in a warm golden glow, casting soft shadows against polished mahogany tables and glinting off the rim of crystal glasses. The air was thick with the rich aroma of seared steak, truffle butter, and aged bourbon, blending seamlessly with the faint melodic hum of live piano music drifting from the far corner of the room. It was the evening rush, that dangerous stretch where exhaustion teetered on the edge of muscle memory. Waiters zigzagged between crowded tables, their trays stacked high with plated entrees, movements fluid yet hurried. Bartenders worked with mechanical precision, their hands pouring cocktails without needing to glance at the recipe. The low hum of conversation, punctuated by the occasional clink of silverware against porcelain, filled the air like the steady heartbeat of the establishment. For Anna Porter, tonight was just another grueling shift. She had been on her feet for 10 straight hours. Her apron was stained, splashes of red wine, smudges from an earlier accident with a tray of creme brulee, reminders of a night that had tested her patience in more ways than one. Her rent was due in 3 days. The stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter seemed to grow heavier by the minute, a weight she couldn't afford to ignore. Tips had been mediocre at best, barely enough to cover gas, let alone groceries. But still, she smiled, because she had to. Because in this business, you didn't get to be tired. You didn't get to let the stress show. As she wiped down an empty table, the sound of the front door swinging open sent a sudden gust of crisp night air rushing through the restaurant. Anna barely registered it at first, just another late-night guest stepping in from the cold. But then, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a presence. Heads turned, not in the casual, distracted way people glance up at new arrivals, but in a way that sent an undeniable ripple through the space. Something was different. Curious, Anna instinctively flicked her gaze toward the entrance, her grip tightening around the damp cloth in her hand. A young man stepped inside, tall, composed. His movements measured, his confidence effortless. Not the boastful, attention-seeking kind, but the kind that came from knowing exactly who he was. And behind him, two men, security, no doubt about it. Anna's brows furrowed slightly as she glanced toward the host stand, where the maitre d', who had been perfectly relaxed only moments ago, now stood a little too straight, his expression shifting to something sharper. This wasn't the kind of place that regularly saw politicians, celebrities, or high-profile guests. It was upscale, yes, but intimate. A place where business executives sealed deals over aged whiskey, where couples celebrated anniversaries beneath a flicker of candlelight, where powerful men escaped the public eye, not stepped directly into it. And yet, as the young man lifted his gaze, Anna felt a bolt of recognition hit her like a freight train. Her breath caught, her stomach tightened, and as realization slammed into her, the glass she had been wiping nearly slipped from her fingers. Barron Trump. His face had been everywhere, plastered across news channels, splashed across tabloids, dissected by media pundits since he was a child. Barron Trump, the son of a former president, a name too big to ignore, a life too public to escape. Yet, standing before her now, beneath the dim glow of the restaurant's chandeliers, he looked different from the curated images the world had seen for years. He wasn't the distant, stiff figure captured in press photos. He wasn't the brooding teenager that social media loved to analyze. Here, he was something else entirely. Calm, reserved, a quiet observer in a world that had never once stopped watching him. Anna inhaled deeply, steeling herself. He's just another customer, that's all. She smoothed her apron, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, grabbed a menu, and made her way toward the host stand, where the maitre d', normally the picture of effortless composure, was visibly attentive in a way that signaled this was not just another seating. Barron was already being led toward a corner booth, one tucked just far enough from the main dining area, away from the prying eyes of other guests. Anna followed, forcing her best professional smile onto her lips as she neared the table. "Good evening," she greeted, her voice smooth, practiced, steady, despite the strange flutter in her chest. "Welcome to La Brisa. Can I get you something to drink while you decide on your order? Barron looked up, and for the briefest second, she felt pinned in place, not by intimidation, not by power or the weight of his last name, but by something softer. Something unexpectedly kind in his gaze. A cappuccino if you have it, he said, his voice deep yet unassuming. And maybe a steak. Medium rare. Anna nodded, scribbling on her notepad. Of course. Would you like a side with that? He hesitated, just for a beat. Then with a slight, almost absent shrug, surprise me. The corner of her lips twitched upward before she could stop it. Just a small, unguarded smile. I'll make sure it's a good one. He gave a faint, knowing smile in return before shifting his gaze back to the menu. Something about the exchange, so simple, so ordinary, lingered in the air. As Anna turned, walking back toward the bar, she felt it stick to her, settling somewhere she couldn't quite shake. From behind the counter, she stole a few subtle glances at him. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't scrolling mindlessly, wasn't answering emails, wasn't half absorbed in a conversation the way the other corporate regulars always were. Instead, he simply sat there, one hand resting lightly against the table, the other gently turning the page of the menu, though he wasn't really looking at it. Instead, his gaze moved through the restaurant, not watching anyone in particular, just observing. As though he was searching for something, something that wasn't on the menu. She frowned slightly, her brows drawing together. What was he thinking about? There was something unspoken in the air, something that lingered around him like a shadow, subtle, unreadable. She didn't know why she cared. He was just another customer. But still. She carried his cappuccino over, setting the delicate porcelain cup gently in front of him, the faint aroma of steamed milk and rich espresso curling into the space between them. Enjoy, she said, her voice softer this time, the words leaving her lips more naturally than she expected. He looked up. Thanks. The word was simple, unremarkable, but his voice, smooth, thoughtful, and there was a weight to it, not just polite acknowledgement, not just a passing response, as though he wasn't just thanking her for the drink, but for something else entirely. The hours slipped by. The restaurant, once bursting with movement and noise, began to quiet. The hectic rush of the evening gave way to a softer, more intimate atmosphere. The low hum of lingering conversations, the distant clink of glassware being polished behind the bar, the occasional scrape of a chair being tucked back. Baron Trump finished his meal. Anna was busy resetting a nearby table when she caught a small movement from the corner of her eye. Subtle, unassuming. He was reaching into his jacket pocket, pulling out a pen. She stilled, watched. He leaned over the bill. The tip of the pen met the paper, his movements deliberate yet unhurried. He wrote something down, then folded the receipt, slipped it beneath the empty cappuccino cup, and without a word, he stood, gathered his coat, took his phone. Anna turned just in time to see him walking toward the door, his security detail moving like shadows behind him. Instinct kicked in before she could think. Thank you for dining with us, she called out, her voice smooth, practiced, yet carrying something more than routine. Barron paused, for half a second, just enough to make it mean something. Then slowly, he turned his head slightly, his blue eyes catching the soft glow of the chandelier. Have a good night, he said. His voice held something almost knowing, something just out of reach. And then he was gone. The door swung shut behind him, the night air rushing in for just a moment before settling again, leaving behind only the lingering scent of espresso and something heavier, something unspoken. Anna exhaled slowly, steadying herself before making her way back to his table. The air around her felt different now, thicker, heavier, charged with something she couldn't quite name. She reached for the empty cappuccino cup, her fingers brushing against the cool porcelain, before picking up the folded receipt tucked beneath it. Her movements were automatic, routine, but the moment she unfolded the paper, her entire world came to a standstill. Her breath caught in her throat, Her stomach dropped, because at the bottom of the check, a tip so large it made her knees nearly buckle. 4 digits. Not a careless display of wealth, not a gesture meant for show. It was deliberate, intentional. But it wasn't the number that sent her reeling. It was the words written above it. Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming. Anna's breath hitched violently. Her vision blurred as she read the words again. Slower this time, as if trying to memorize every single letter, as if trying to make them real. A choked sound escaped her throat, and before she could stop them, tears welled in her eyes, spilling over. Hot, unstoppable. Her hands trembled as she gripped the note, holding on to it as though it were something fragile, something she needed, because it wasn't about the money. It was about being seen. It was about not being invisible. It was about someone who didn't have to care, who could have gone on with his night, untouched by the weight she carried, looking at her and saying, I notice you. And in the middle of a long, exhausting shift, in a restaurant where she had spent years being just another nameless waitress, another unseen worker in a world that never stopped moving, a young man had reminded her that she mattered. Anna had no idea that someone had taken a photo of the note, had no idea that by the next morning, it would be everywhere. Social media exploded. People argued, people cried, people debated whether kindness still existed in the world. News anchors called it a moment of rare generosity, a reminder that, no matter who we all struggle, that some burdens, no matter how different our lives may seem, connect us all. But for Anna, none of that mattered, because for the first time in a long time, she believed the words he wrote. And no matter what the world said, no matter how much the internet spun the story, twisted the meaning, turned it into a debate, she knew one thing: brighter days were coming. This wasn't just a meal, it was a reminder that kindness still exists, that hard work doesn't go unnoticed, and that sometimes a single moment can change everything. Have you ever experienced unexpected kindness from a stranger? Have you ever had a moment where you felt truly seen when you needed it the most? Share your story in the comments. If you believe in the power of generosity, quiet strength, and the impact of small actions, hit subscribe now. Don't miss more stories that restore faith in